Hello again, this is Professor Kim Nelson with the Fashion Institute of Technology Jewelry Design Department. This is a tutorial on how to render metal and cabochon stones. This is the fourth installment in this tutorial, and this tutorial is being developed for the course JD 134. Okay class, now I'm going to do cabochon stones. Start with the red oval. And just like with the yellow and the white metal, I will start with a medium value. Value is dark and light. A medium value lay-in of color. Now beware that every color has its own native value. For example, they use the terminology low key and high key. Low key colors are naturally dark. High key colors are naturally light. Red and green are among the easiest because their native key is medium key. They're medium value colors to begin with. Blue is a low-key color. Purple is a low-key color. They are really at their full saturation when they're dark. Yellow and orange are high-key colors. They're at their full intensity when they're quite light. Yellow is the lightest of all. So if you were painting a yellow stone, you would not actually use the purest yellow for your base lay-in. You would use something very similar to the yellow ochre, maybe a little lighter than yellow ochre, that you use on yellow gold. If you're going to do a blue stone or a purple stone, you wouldn't go with a full intensity dark blue or dark purple. You would use something lighter to lay this in. You want to start, because you want to have room to build form, you need to start with a medium value for your base lay-in. Now I'm going to put in the darks. Since you all have different colors in your watercolor sets, this is a cool red. I'm doing a ruby, which is a cool red. To create the darker color here, I would use a neutral tint mixed in with that. And if it became too cold, I might add a little bit of warm red back into it to try and keep it true to color. But that's really all there is to that. Doing a dark area up in the left-hand corner. And a dark, thin crescent in the lower right. Now I'm going to come in and paint white for the detail. And that detail will be the handy kind of yin-yang form or paisley. I'm going to carry that also behind the shaded crescent. I'm going to bring, as if it were a reflected light, a strip of white around the outside of the stone on the upper left. And just kind of a swirling dash of white here. And maybe I'll add what will be a secondary highlight. That will not be the primary highlight. That'll be a secondary highlight. And then for my main highlight, a large, fairly elliptical, circular but elliptical, fat oval highlight here. And I will probably bring in a small highlight to break up this a little and let that carry in kind of a swirling motion as well. There, that's enough white detail. Now I'm going to glaze the stone. For a glaze, I'm going to pick a thinned down version of the same color. Like in the faceted stones, when you do these glazes, you're tinting. You are not trying to lay in a big swash of color. You're tinting. You are painting with transparent thin color. Your brush strokes matter. The consistency of the paint matters. The paint should be thin, but there shouldn't be very much paint on your brush. And your brush strokes should follow the shape of the stone. If it were a faceted stone, your strokes would follow diagonals and angles to strengthen the faceting effect. On a Cabochon stone, your brush strokes will follow a circular pattern. Once you've laid in your wash, take a look at it, let it dry. If you feel like you would like some more warmth or a different shade or darker or lighter, you can come back in once it's dry with another glaze. Glazing is how Da Vinci and the Renaissance painters built up their oil paintings. They did a value study, usually in shades of warm gray, browns, and then they came in and glazed over it with thin oil paint. You're doing something similar here. So your glaze doesn't have to be all one color. After you've finished glazing your stone, going to bring back up the highlight, come back in with Pro White, and re-establish your highlight. Like so. In this particular stone, going to have a little darker on that side, and then I'm going to come back in with a little lighter color, little wash of white to pick that up. The little wash of white I didn't care for after I did it, so kick it back down again. Okay, that's fine. That's a ruby cabochon. Now I'm going to do it on a circle. I'm going to do it with an amethyst. As I said, for an amethyst, you're going to, even though a native color for purple, the native key is low key, we're going to pick a medium value version of that purple. It's again going to come in with a shaded area. upper left. And I'm going to continue that in the crescent down in the corner. Now, since this is a round and it's a high dome cab, just like doing a dome in metal, that crescent is going to come fairly far away from the edge. There's going to be a good amount of stone left behind here. Okay guys. I've made a mistake. I'm going to start over. I was wondering why I couldn't get good values. It's because I'm working on the glaze layer. I'm sorry, I apologize. It's going to be the same steps. It's just you can see now I'm getting much more intense color, and that's what excuse me, I had expected, and I wasn't getting it, and I kept trying to make things more saturated and deeper and darker, and I couldn't get it, and it's because on the glaze layer it's thin and translucent. Same steps. Nothing wrong with some repetition. Only now I should be able to get, yes, some much stronger shadows, which are important on an amethyst. Okay, come in with my white. And as I did on the ruby, bring in my paisley or yin-yang shape. I want that to carry around. On the far side. I want the reflected light treatment going around the edge in the white. If it doesn't go down dead opaque the first time with your Pro White, just come back over it. Kind of a backup highlight. Primary highlight is going to be close to the center and good sized. Do a second one here, and as I did over here, I tend to like to break this shadow up with another one or two small dots. Okay. Might want to try putting in some linear, like I did over here. If it's a large stone, these are large stones, comparatively speaking, and so they tend to ask for a little more detail. This area, this large wide area, come in and break up with a dark line. Fine. Now I'm going to do my glaze. Excuse me. And as on the red, I'm going to follow the shape of the stone. Follow the shape of the details within the stone. Here you don't have facets, you have pools of light and shadow. So follow those, because if this brush starts to pick up the white gouache and starts to smear it around, as long as your brush strokes are consistent with the shape of the stone, you don't have a serious problem on your hands. It only becomes a serious problem if you start running off in a different direction. Going to do a little richer. Some richer glazing. See, if you think of the glazing as another step of painting instead of just varnishing over or laying in a pool of color, you can use the varnish, use the wrong term, use the glaze to add more detail, to add more interest. Whether it's some extra values, maybe it's some cool, more blue-violet casts into the stone. Instead of having it all one color. You would mix a blue-violet just the way it sounds. Your purple and a little bit of your warm blue, your ultramarine. You wouldn't use phthalo for this because the phthalo has a lot of green in it. Conversely, pick up some pinks as well. Okay? Now what I need to do is pick up the white highlight, come back in, reinforce it. Also reinforce the secondary highlight. This one's about right. This one up here, using my glaze, I'm going to use a little bit of a white glaze. That's too light. And I'm going to glaze this little highlight to get it just the way I want it. About like that. This is kind of boring, so I'm going to come in with a very dark glaze. The point is that glazing is a way of painting. It's not just slapping color on top of your work. It's continuing your work. Okay, that stone would be finished. Okay. Pardon me. The next stone I'm going to do is going to be in this large setting here. It's going to be a very large peridot. The larger the stone, the more challenging it is because the more detail you have to put down. Once again, I want a medium value. I will try this color and see what I think. Peridots are quite light. That may be a little dark. Well, we'll take it. See where it ends. See where it goes. Okay. Since it's a fairly light stone, and Peridot's not a real contrasty stone, I'm not looking to get a real dark shadow up in the corner on this. That's certainly plenty dark enough. Same thing as before. This is on the underside of the stone, this is on the top of the stone. Just like in a faceted stone, where this would be the pavilion and this would be the table facets or crown facets, to be more correct. Now I'm going to paint the white. Starting with a paisley form. I'm going to leave that little detail. It's a large stone, so I can afford to. I'm going to, excuse me guys, allergies. I'm going to bring the white back in behind. I'm allowing it to swirl into the stone. Because I know with this large of a stone, my challenge is going to be finding excuses for enough detail. I'm going to do a reflected light treatment, going around the edge. As I mentioned in the last tutorial, normally I would paint the stone first, so that I don't have to be so careful with the edging of it. Some accent lines in white. That last one isn't great. On a stone this large, I would actually paint it out and repaint it. Okay, now I need to do the highlight. Good sized highlight. Secondary highlight. That's not a very nice shape. Intersperse some dots. There. That's ready for glazing. Glazes on a Peridot will be fairly light to start with. And they will follow the form, as always. This is actually a little too light. I mean, a little too dark, too rich for average Peridot. This would be a serious Peridot with this brilliant. This is almost like a demantoid garnet. But for our purposes, I'm following the form of everything I paint, tinting it. I do want to get some kind of color down over the whole surface so I can see what I think it needs. I need some more dark along this edge. So I'm going to glaze a little more dark along here, and I'll actually let that dark go all the way down to the edge and break that ring in a couple of places. Use a bit of dark here. This is pretty jarring, so I'll kick that back. This little line I painted is kind of jarring, so I'll paint it back as well. Bring in some light color, a little bit of whitewash, and then reinforce my highlights. Okay, it's a little busy. I'm going to kick some of this back. You can always count on the larger the stone, the more work you're going to get to do on it. Playing back and forth, struggling to get just the effect I want. I think that's okay. So there's a Peridot. The last stone, large stone I'm going to paint on here, is going to be a pearl. This is a stone that's actually much easier to show you in the gouache than on a computer, but we will do our best here. Color you want to mix for a pearl base is generally burnt unburnt pro white with a little bit of yellow ochre. What you want when you are done is a slightly golden flesh tone. Of course, what we interpret as slightly golden and flesh tone is going to vary, but kind of a golden peach. Okay? As if you were, when I was a kid, I used to build small plastic kits, and you could get a little bottle of enamel paint that said flesh tone, and it was an obnoxious pink. This is a warm white. Not too white, though. You still need, while your middle tone isn't going to be as in the middle as with the stones, it can't be white. It can't be too light. This is too light. There we go. Kind of a buff color. Would be a better way to describe it. Now, one of the most indispensable tools for me when doing pearls is a blending stomp. Blending stomp is a small coil of tightly packed paper, comes to a point that they use to blend graphite with. I'm going to try and duplicate the effect. Okay. I've done it twice. I painted on the glaze layer again. That's all right. I thought that should have worked. Okay. Yes. Using the blending stomp, you're going to get some graphite on your stomp, and you are going to rub that graphite onto the surface to create basically a bruise, a large, dark area. It's a little too large. In the upper left quadrant. Then you're going to create a shadow crescent. Very much like what we've done with the cabochons. It's a very similar process. Having done that, next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our highlight, which will be close in toward the center. Do not make it too small. Couple of auxiliary or secondary highlights. Okay. So now we have it underway. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in some swirling strokes of color. Pearls, when you look at them, are never just white or buff colored. They have accent color in them. A common accent color would be green. These would be watery strokes. Another common accent color is purple. And in gouache, you'll do exactly what I'm doing here. You will drop these in, maybe a little pink as well. And once you've done this, you're going to take your brush, put just the slightest hint of pearl white on it. Very watered down pearl white, and yet very little water on the brush. The thing I show you to never do in class, where you put the brush in your mouth to get it just damp. That's how dry you want it. You want it just damp. And you're going to come in and you're going to blend what was initially fairly jarring strokes of color. You're going to use the white and you're going to use the buff color that you laid down. Go back and forth to blend your pearl. The only thing you really don't want to blend is the edge of that highlight. You want your highlights to pop. You want them to stay strong. I want to bring in the white value here. And up along that edge. And that's a fairly decent mock-up of how you would handle this in gouache. Digitally, there are more straightforward ways to go about this, but I'm trying hard to mimic the technique of gouache and a blending stomp. If I feel like I need a little more gray, I would bring my blending stomp back in and add a little. Or I could actually mix the color on my brush and add a little. The blending stomp is just a trick of the trade. You can achieve the same effect by just using paint and not having a blending stomp. And it's good to know how to do that because sometimes you don't have access to a blending stomp. The only thing I would criticize with the way I've painted this is that I put that highlight right in the middle of my smudge, which doesn't look nice. It looks kind of like an eye. It's not pretty. So I am going to fix it. It's one of those things you hate to do because you finally got it right, or done. If not right, done. And you hate to go back in. But I would take my blending stomp and do just that. Go back in. And then take white again. If you're afraid to go back in and touch up your work, you're kind of a prisoner. You have to not be afraid to say, oh, I don't like that exactly right the way it is. I'm going to go back in and redo it and repaint it. Yes, I think that is much more successful. So it was worth going back into. That is how you would paint a pearl. Now the last thing I want to show you on this sheet, well, possibly not the last, but one of the last. Go with that. Is I am going to take this white metal ring and I am going to do it in pave. I'm just making a copy of it so that you don't lose the example in non-pave. Okay. First step. Is to draw the pave. A couple of ways you can do that. You can draw it as circles, actually delineate on the surface, small, fine drawn circles. Another way, the way I'm going to go about it, is going to be to draw grayed out circles. It's a little too dark. And each one of these is a diamond. So I would get my neutral tint Pro White or just a wash of neutral tint. Either would be fine. If you find a shape goes wrong, don't be too alarmed. Be aware that diamonds go into perspective as they go away from you, as they slope across the surface of the ring. These aren't round anymore. These are ellipses over here. The only diamonds, the only round stones that will truly look round are the ones staring directly up at you. Every other diamond that you indicate on here is going to be an ellipse. This is round, this is round. This is fairly round here. Fairly round there. Going back into an ellipse here. Starting to become elliptical there. Try to leave as little of these large spaces of metal as possible. Of course, this becomes an issue of how to lay out pave, which is a bit beyond the means of this tutorial, but You don't want metallic effect in pave. You want your pave to be as much stone as possible. That's why it's French for paved, pave. As the stones roll farther and farther down the face of the ring away from you, they should become more and more elliptical. You don't want to carry them right to the edge. You want to leave metal at the very edge, a rim. A small rim, but a rim. You should be aware of what the smallest pave or melee, smallest diamond, your client would want you to use might be. Usually it's 1 millimeter, which would be in the vicinity of the stones I am painting now. I could set this shank with large stones coming down, but if you put a large diamond layout on this thin shank, what you're going to end up with is a faceted shank. You're going to end up with flat planes. You're basically going to flatten that piece of metal out, because diamonds are flat. They are flat on top. They cannot be made to curve on top. The pave along the edge here becomes quite elliptical. I'm chuckling to myself because I went to the trouble to make a copy and I painted the pave on the original, which is fine. It's been a long week. Okay. Now faceting these. I mean, you can come in and put a small shadow in the corner of each one of these. You can do that, but these are small enough stones that it's not really warranted. The gray circle that you've made works. How to paint pave? Pave, I've seen pave done like this. It's just a long diagonal and a dot. That's fine. If it's big enough, I'll generally add more lines, getting kind of an asterisk effect, or a box with a dash down the center. The eye is going to read it as faceted. For very elliptical stones like this, then yes, you're going to come up with a very simple faceting solution for those. But if you've got the room, careful. The important thing is, guys, be careful not to lose the individual stones. As random and carefree as I'm being with this faceting, you can still feel and point out the individual stones. Form-wise, if your stone is in a shaded area, like in through here, you're not going to want to put a lot of faceting on it, because it's impossible for that stone to rest as being kind of a non-brightly lit stone if it's already all white with faceting. So like here, these I will handle with just a line and a dot. Maybe a line and a couple of dots. Then as I come back up onto the part of the shank that's got light hitting it. I'll do more with it. Okay, so there. That's the first basic step of the pave. The next thing I'm going to do is add beads. It's a very important step. You cannot do pave without beads. And the way you're going to do the beads is you're going to draw with your brush little dark beads. Paint them larger than you think they would be. The beads go in between the two stones. The stones will share a bead wherever possible, unless you have a large open metal space due to a strange layout issue like here. Then I added in a couple of beads. Here I can put one large bead and pretend it reaches all the stones. Here, not so easily. I would put 2 beads to fill that piece of metal. The reason you're doing these in a dark color is to make them visible as you're doing them, so you can see right away where you're missing them, where there are stones without beads. And it's also the handiest way to get really clean and concise looking little beads when you paint them. And I will show you how that works in just a minute. As with building the form on a piece, I discussed low-hanging fruit. Do all the beads that you can figure out easily first. Beads that you're confident you know where they would sit. Places where you can see that there's a big gap in the middle. Places where you haven't, hopefully, lost track of where your stones are. Areas that aren't too heavily shaded so that when you put the bead it just blends into the shadow background. Put down what you know first. Once you've done that, you can go back and add any extra beads you want. Okay, so there. I've drawn the black circles for the beads. Now I'm going to draw the beads themselves. And drawing the beads themselves simply consists of coming back into the center of each one of those little black dots and making a white dot. And by doing this, you paint incredibly delicate little beads with a tiny little black outline around them that, to my knowledge, there's really no other way to paint. It looks like you've hand painted each little circle and filled it with white, which of course you haven't. So what we're creating is a texture. Hopefully, because of the way you've faceted, because you've painted the form of the ring to begin with underneath the stones. By the way, if I were painting this ring initially for pave, I would not have gone into this much detail. I would have gone just to where the form was clear and stopped. All the extra reflections and things, the little reflected lights and all of that, are not really going to be useful once you cover the whole surface with diamond, except for, of course, under the shank here, for example, where it's going to be still visible. This is tedious work. When I bill pave, when someone has me do a rendering for them, and it's pave work, I basically tell them to count on a minute a stone. So if the piece has 150 stones, I'll be painting this way for 2 hours. Now, I won't necessarily really be painting this way for 2 hours. Things go much quicker, but sometimes they don't. And as a professional, I have to cover myself for the times when they don't. Okay? There. I have the pave texture laid in. Now what I need to do is to bring back the form, because obviously I've lost a good portion of that. And bringing back the form is going to be a two-step process. I'm going to get a thin wash of white. Very little white pigment, but enough that you can see it. And fairly dry. And I am going to, I usually go diagonally because it keeps in, or it's in keeping with the angle of the facets. I will start whitening stones. That would be in the highlight area of the ring. Okay? It is okay to actually let that wash carry across the prongs a little if you want. But be careful, because you just went through a lot of work to delineate careful little prongs, and it takes very few brush strokes like this to eradicate them to where you can't see them anymore. So you spent a lot of work for nothing. Okay? That's the first step. And you can see that I have brought some form back into the piece. The second step, final step, is to come back in with my brush, with just Pro White, and I'm going to pick a few stones. To paint solid white. This helps me establish form. It also helps to give that effect of cleanly drawn little white stones, which your eye will take to mean that all the other little fuddly faceted stones are also carefully drawn white stones, circles. Remember, when you do stones that would be ellipses, make them ellipses. Don't connect them. Try not to do two in a row, which I've done here, which is not good. Kind of find and lose. Otherwise, it loses that effect. Okay? Now I'm going to come back in, and on some of the stones in between, I'm going to embolden the facets. Just going to add brighter facets. Leave some stones dark. That's very important. If some of the stones do not stay dark, you've killed your form in the pave. Okay? You might find at the end that you need to clean up your rendering of the shank a little bit, because where you've put shadows and things before was based on there being no diamonds on there, and with the diamonds on there, it changes things. Okay, now to finish the effect on this ring, I'm going to paint that stone in the center, the colored stone. Because we haven't really covered how to paint a stone that is not at a straight up and down orientation. So I'm going to make it a sapphire. Okay. This is an interesting dilemma because of the way this has been painted. I will lose my facet lines. And you know what? I'm good with that. I'm going to show you what it's like to paint a stone without your facet lines. Okay, so there's the medium value. I'm going to bring in a shadow that heads down towards where the culet would be. These are going to be just gestured diagonal lines of shadow. And I'm going to, where these facets would be here, I'm going to bring in a little more dark. Okay. Now I'm going to paint my white. Would help if I went to white. Okay. I'm carefully painting in my crown facets along the high lit side. I'm going to pick up some of this faceting too. Like so. Under here, I'm going to paint some white shapes and lines. To indicate what's happening here. I do not have to paint in every facet. I want, once again, to reference that culet, which would be down here in perspective. I'm going to paint in some light diagonal triangular shapes. You want to feel things radiating toward that culet. There. That's enough. Now I'm going to glaze it. This time using the brush to accentuate the shapes of these facets, so that if I do pick up the white and I drag it, I am just reinforcing the work I've already done. I'm not obliterating it. Okay. I may decide that I want some cooler blues in there for interest, so I'll come back in, add some of that maybe. And then I will come back and I will pick out my white facets. Pick up the edge of this table where the light bounces off of it. And I'm doing the same thing I did with the cabochons. I'm just coming in and playing around, getting what I want. There, I'm pretty happy with that. That's okay. If I wanted to really crispen up that white faceting, I can do that. I just have to get a really fine point on my brush. And pick them out. Like so. Done. All right, so good. That's it for this tutorial. I am going to try and put together one more tutorial where I paint hardstone, things like coral and turquoise, maybe even opal. But for now, this is done. Thanks so much for your time.